Marcus watched through his kitchen window as 3 black SUVs surrounded his house at exactly 7:30 a.m. Colonel Morrison emerged from the lead vehicle wearing tactical gear, followed by a team of military intelligence operatives. But these weren't the people Marcus was expecting to see. Behind the government vehicles, a white van pulled up, and Kevin Walsh stepped out along with 2 men in expensive suits. Walsh was carrying what appeared to be a planted evidence bag, clearly intended to complete Marcus's frame-up. What happened next unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Colonel Morrison's team had been tracking Walsh and his associates since before dawn, waiting for them to make their move. As Walsh approached Marcus's front door with his planted evidence, he found himself surrounded by armed federal agents. "Kevin Walsh, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and threatening a federal witness," Colonel Morrison announced as Walsh dropped the evidence bag in shock. Through his window, Marcus watched as his former colleague's face went through a range of emotions: confusion, fear, and finally resignation. The 2 men with Walsh tried to run but were quickly apprehended by operatives who had been positioned around the neighborhood since midnight. Colonel Morrison knocked on Marcus's door exactly as she had promised. When he opened it, she was smiling for the first time since he'd met her. "Mr. Thompson, it's over. We have everything we need to clear your name and dismantle their entire operation." The evidence bag Walsh had been carrying contained drugs and cash that would have been discovered in Marcus's garage, providing the final piece of evidence needed to ensure his conviction. Security footage from hidden cameras showed Walsh breaking into Marcus's property to plant the evidence, along with audio recordings of him coordinating with his criminal associates. But the real breakthrough came when the 2 men with Walsh immediately began cooperating with authorities. Both were mid-level operatives in a criminal organization that had been selling security access to foreign intelligence services and domestic criminals. The operation was far larger than even Colonel Morrison had initially suspected. Walsh was small fish, she explained as they watched the arrests from Marcus's living room. The man in the gray suit is Antonio Reeves, a former intelligence officer who's been selling government secrets for 3 years. The organization has operatives in 12 different government facilities. Over the next several hours, Marcus's house became an informal command center as Colonel Morrison coordinated simultaneous arrests across the city. Inspector Davies arrived to personally apologize and officially clear Marcus of all charges. The fabricated evidence was removed from his file, and his suspension was lifted with full back pay. "Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology," Davies said sincerely. "The evidence against you was so convincing that we never questioned whether it might be fabricated. Your case is going to change how we investigate internal corruption." By afternoon, the media had gotten wind of the story. Marcus watched news reports describing him as a heroic guard who helped expose a major corruption scandal, rather than the suspected criminal he had been just hours before. The vindication felt surreal after weeks of living under suspicion. Sarah and the children returned that evening, and Marcus finally felt like his life was returning to normal. Emma and James were excited to see their father on television, though they didn't fully understand why he had become famous. "Daddy, are you a hero now?" Emma asked during dinner. Marcus looked at his family gathered around their kitchen table and realized that the answer was more complicated than his daughter could understand. "I think the real heroes were the people who believed in me when things looked impossible, and the people who worked to find the truth." 3 weeks later, Marcus returned to his position at the palace. His fellow guards treated him with a mixture of respect and awe. He had become something of a legend in their small community. Sergeant Williams had been promoted to inspector and was leading a complete review of security procedures. The criminal organization's infiltration had been more extensive than anyone realized. 7 guards across 3 government facilities had been working for the criminals, along with 2 supervisors and a member of the Internal Affairs Department. The investigation ultimately led to the arrest of 23 people and the prevention of several planned security breaches. Kevin Walsh, faced with overwhelming evidence, had cooperated fully with authorities. He revealed that Marcus had been targeted not just because he had reported Walsh for sleeping on duty, but because his stellar reputation and family connections made him the perfect scapegoat. The criminals had needed someone whose downfall would be believable, but whose guilt would never be seriously questioned by colleagues. They studied you for months, Colonel Morrison explained during their final meeting. Your routines, your family, life, even your psychological profile. They knew you would react predictably to being accused, and they counted on your honesty and straightforwardness to make you seem guilty when you couldn't explain the evidence. Marcus received a commendation from the government for his role in exposing the corruption, along with a financial settlement for the damages to his reputation and family. But the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Tony Rivera, the guard who had initially offered to help but then disappeared, came to see Marcus at work. He looked embarrassed and nervous as he approached Marcus's post. "Marcus, I owe you an explanation and an apology," Tony said quietly. "Walsh got to me after I called you. He threatened my family and offered me money to keep quiet. I was a coward." Marcus studied Tony's face and saw genuine remorse. "Tony, they were professionals at intimidation. I understand why you were scared. I've been thinking about what you said on the phone, that none of us are safe as long as corrupt people are operating. You were right. By staying silent, I was putting everyone at risk." Tony handed Marcus an envelope. "I wrote down everything I saw and heard over the past year. I should have come forward earlier, but I want to make sure this never happens again." As Marcus read Tony's detailed account, he realized that his ordeal had accomplished something beyond clearing his own name. It had shown other people that it was possible to stand up to corruption and win, even when the odds seemed impossible. 6 months later, Marcus was promoted to sergeant and put in charge of training new guards in ethical conduct and corruption prevention. His story became part of the standard curriculum, teaching new recruits that integrity sometimes required courage, but that courage was always worth the cost. On quiet evenings at home, Marcus would sometimes think about how close he had come to losing everything: his job, his reputation, his family's safety, and his children's faith in him. The experience had taught him that justice wasn't guaranteed, but it was always worth fighting for. Emma, now 9 years old, had written a school essay about her father that concluded, "My daddy taught me that good people sometimes have to be brave to stay good. Even when scary things happen, we should never stop doing what's right." Marcus kept a copy of that essay in his wallet, right next to his badge. It reminded him daily that the most important battles weren't always fought on grand stages, but in the quiet moments when ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things simply because they were right. The criminal organization was eventually traced to international connections, leading to arrests in 4 countries and the prevention of several planned terrorist attacks. Marcus's decision to fight back against his false accusation had ultimately helped protect national security on a scale he never could have imagined. But for Marcus Thompson, the greatest victory was much simpler. His children still saw him as a hero. His wife still trusted him completely, and he could look at himself in the mirror each morning knowing that he had never compromised his integrity, even when it would have been easier to give up. The lesson Colonel Morrison had taught him, that sometimes ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary circumstances and must choose between safety and justice, had become the guiding principle of his life. Marcus had learned that heroes weren't born. They were made in moments when good people refused to let evil win without a fight. Colonel Patricia Morrison was not what Marcus had expected. She was a petite woman in her 40s with steel-gray eyes and an air of quiet authority that commanded immediate respect. They met at an unmarked government building downtown, in a conference room that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. "Mr. Thompson, before we begin, I need you to understand the scope of what we're dealing with," Colonel Morrison said, activating a device that would prevent electronic surveillance. "The criminal organization that framed you has been operating for 3 years. They've infiltrated security positions in government buildings, airports, and even military installations." She spread out a series of photographs and documents on the table. Marcus recognized several faces from the palace, including Kevin Walsh, but there were others he'd never seen before. Their operation is sophisticated. They place their people in security positions, then sell access to the highest bidder. Want to smuggle something into a government building? They can arrange it. Need to plant surveillance equipment in a secure location? They have the access codes. Marcus studied the photos, feeling sick as he realized how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. How does framing me fit into all this? You were getting too close to the truth without realizing it. When you reported Walsh for sleeping on duty, you triggered an investigation into his activities. Rather than risk exposure, they decided to eliminate you as a threat and provide a scapegoat for their operations. Colonel Morrison pulled out a recording device. What you're about to hear was captured by one of our undercover agents 3 weeks ago. The recording was clearer than Maria's surveillance audio. Marcus heard Walsh's voice clearly. Thompson's getting suspicious, he asked. Too many questions about the schedule changes, and he's been watching the East Gate too closely. We need to neutralize him before he puts the pieces together. Another voice, which Marcus didn't recognize, replied, The frame-up is already in motion. Once Thompson is arrested, we'll have months to clean up our operation and relocate our assets. Marcus felt his anger rising. They destroyed my life and threatened my children just to buy themselves time. Mr. Thompson, we want to offer you a chance to help us bring down the entire organization, Colonel Morrison said. But I need to be completely honest about the risks involved. She outlined their plan. Marcus would return to his normal routine, but under constant surveillance by military intelligence operatives. The goal was to make the criminal organization believe their frame-up had failed and that Marcus was trying to return to work. This would force them to take more desperate action, hopefully exposing their leadership and the full scope of their operation. The danger is real, Colonel Morrison emphasized. These people have already threatened your family and eliminated at least one potential witness. If they realize you're working with us, they won't hesitate to escalate their response. Henri thought about his children, now safely at Sarah's mother's house. Colonel, what guarantee do I have that my family will be protected? Full witness protection if necessary. But we believe this operation will be concluded within 2 weeks. After that, you'll have your life back, along with complete vindication and probably a commendation for your service to national security. Sarah, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. What if something goes wrong? What if they try to kill Marcus? Colonel Morrison's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Thompson, your husband will have protection you can't see, but that will be there every moment. We have some of the best operatives in the country working on this case. Marcus made his decision. What do you need me to do? The plan was deceptively simple. Marcus would meet with Inspector Davies and claim he had remembered new details that might help the investigation. He would suggest that someone else might be involved and offer to return to the palace in an unofficial capacity to help identify the real culprit. The criminal organization has contacts inside internal affairs, Colonel Morrison explained. When Davies reports your offer, it will reach the wrong people within hours. They'll assume you're getting close to the truth and will likely make a move against you. What kind of move? Based on their previous behavior, they'll either try to eliminate you permanently or plant additional evidence to ensure your conviction. Either way, we'll be ready. 2 days later, Marcus sat in the same interview room where he'd been questioned weeks before. Inspector Davies looked skeptical as Marcus presented his new theory about the case. Inspector, I've been thinking about the timing of everything, Marcus said, following the script Colonel Morrison had provided. Someone would need access to my schedule, my locker, and the security systems. I think another guard might be involved. Davies leaned forward with interest. Do you have someone specific in mind? Marcus pretended to be reluctant. I don't want to falsely accuse anyone, but Kevin Walsh has been acting strangely lately. He seems to have money he shouldn't have, and he's been asking odd questions about security procedures. This is the first time you've mentioned Walsh, Davies observed. I didn't want to believe a fellow guard could be involved, but the evidence is pointing in his direction. If you could get me back into the palace unofficially, I might be able to gather proof. Davies promised to consider the request and ended the meeting. Marcus left the police station knowing that within hours his conversation would be reported to people who wanted him dead. That evening, Marcus sat in his empty house, knowing that invisible protectors were watching from multiple locations. Sarah had agreed to stay with the children until the operation was complete, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and fears. His phone rang at exactly 10 p.m. The voice was electronically disguised, but the message was clear. Mr. Thompson, you have 24 hours to withdraw your offer to help the investigation and leave the city permanently. If you refuse, your family will pay the price. Marcus followed his instructions and immediately called Colonel Morrison to report the threat. They took the bait, she confirmed. Now we wait for them to make their move. Marcus barely slept that night, knowing that somewhere in the darkness people were planning his death while other people were planning to stop them. Tomorrow would either bring vindication or disaster, and there was nothing he could do but trust in the professionalism of people he barely knew. As dawn approached, Marcus realized that regardless of the outcome, he had already won something important. He had refused to be a victim and had chosen to fight back against injustice. Whatever happened next, his children would know that their father had stood up for what was right, even when it was dangerous. The phone rang again at 6 a.m. This time it was Colonel Morrison. Mr. Thompson, they're moving faster than we expected. Stay exactly where you are and don't answer the door for anyone except me. Today is going to be very interesting. Tony Rivera's call never came the next day. When Marcus tried calling him back, the phone went straight to voicemail. A sick feeling settled in Marcus's stomach as he realized that either Tony had gotten cold feet or someone had convinced him to stay quiet. Maria Santos confirmed his fears during their meeting at Henderson's office. I tried to contact Rivera at the palace yesterday. His supervisor said he called in sick and hasn't been seen since your conversation with him. Henderson frowned as he reviewed his notes. That's either a coincidence or someone is actively working to silence potential witnesses. We need to move faster. What about the financial evidence on Walsh? Marcus asked desperately. It's compelling but circumstantial, Henderson admitted. A good prosecutor could argue that Walsh's extra money came from legitimate sources we haven't discovered. Yet, we need something that directly connects him to the crimes you're accused of. Maria pulled out a folder of photographs. I've been conducting surveillance on Walsh for the past 3 days. He meets regularly with the same well-dressed man near the palace, always in locations without security cameras. Yesterday, I managed to get close enough to overhear part of their conversation. She handed Marcus a small recording device. The audio was scratchy, but Walsh's voice was clearly identifiable. Thompson is finished. Internal Affairs bought the whole setup. Once they arrest him, the heat will be off us for months. Marcus felt a surge of vindication mixed with anger. This proves he framed me. Henderson held up a cautioning hand. It's evidence, but it was obtained without a warrant on private property. A judge might not allow it in court. Then what good is it? Sarah asked in frustration. It confirms we're on the right track and it might be useful for negotiating with the prosecutor, Henderson explained. But we still need legitimate evidence that will hold up in court. Maria continued her report. There's something else. Walsh has been asking questions about Thompson's family, their daily routines, where the children go to school. He's either planning something or he's already planning his next move. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. You think he might try to hurt my family? I think he's desperate, Maria replied. If his frame-up falls apart, he faces serious prison time. Desperate people do dangerous things. Henderson immediately called the police to request increased patrols around Marcus's home and the children's school. We're dealing with someone who's already demonstrated sophisticated planning and ruthless execution. We can't take any chances. That evening, Marcus sat Emma and James down for a difficult conversation. Sarah had suggested they send the children to her mother's house in another city until the situation was resolved. Kids, Mommy and I think it would be fun for you to visit Grandma for a few weeks, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice light. Emma, always perceptive, wasn't fooled. Is it because of the bad man who's trying to hurt Daddy? Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. They had tried to shield the children from the worst details, but kids heard more than adults realized. There are some people who aren't being truthful. About Daddy, Sarah explained gently. We just want to make sure you're safe while we fix this problem. James, who was 6 and usually more concerned with toys than adult problems, surprised them by asking, Daddy, are you scared? Marcus knelt down to his son's level. Sometimes grown-ups get scared, James. But being scared doesn't mean we stop fighting for what's right. And I'm fighting to make sure our family stays safe and together. The next morning, as Sarah packed the children's suitcases, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Sergeant Williams, his former supervisor, stood nervously on the front porch. "Marcus, I know I'm not supposed to be here, but there's something you need to know," Williams said, glancing around as if he expected to be watched. "What is it, Sergeant?" Williams pulled out an envelope. "This came to my office yesterday, addressed to you. It has no return address, and frankly, it makes me nervous." Inside the envelope was a single photograph showing Marcus's children walking into their school with a message written on the back. "Some problems are easier to solve than others." Marcus's hands shook as he showed the photo to Williams. "This is a direct threat against my family. Marcus, I've known you for 12 years. I don't believe you're guilty of corruption, but I think you've stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than either of us understood." Williams looked around nervously again before continuing. "There have been rumors for months about organized crime infiltrating palace security. High-level people are involved, people with the power to make evidence appear and disappear." "Are you saying Kevin Walsh is working for organized crime?" "I'm saying Walsh is small fish. Someone with real power and resources is behind this frame-up. They chose you because you're clean, reliable, and would make a perfect scapegoat." The sergeant handed Marcus another piece of paper. "This is the cell phone number for Colonel Patricia Morrison. She's military intelligence and she's been investigating corruption in government security forces. If anyone can help you, it's her." After Williams left, Marcus stared at the phone number. Contacting military intelligence felt like escalating the situation to a dangerous new level. But the threat against his children had changed everything. He called Henderson first, who agreed that Colonel Morrison might be their best option for protection and investigation resources beyond what local police could provide. "Marcus, if this involves organized crime and high-level corruption, we're out of our league," Henderson admitted. "Military intelligence has tools and authority that we don't." That afternoon, Marcus made the call that would change everything. Colonel Morrison's voice was crisp and professional when she answered. "Mr. Thompson, Sergeant Williams told me you might call. I've been following your case with interest. Colonel, my family is being threatened, and I think I've been framed by people more powerful than I initially realized. Mr. Thompson, what I'm about to tell you is classified, but your situation has become part of a larger investigation. We've been tracking a criminal organization that's been infiltrating government security positions for over 2 years. Your case might be the break we've been waiting for." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that someone with real authority believed him. Terror that his family had become pawns in a much larger and more dangerous game. "What do you need from me, Colonel?" "First, we need to make sure your family is absolutely safe. Then, we need you to help us catch the people who framed you. But I have to warn you, Mr. Thompson, what we're asking you to do will be extremely dangerous." Marcus looked at the threatening photograph of his children and made his decision. "Colonel, I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family and clear my name." "Good. We'll meet tomorrow morning. And Mr. Thompson, don't trust anyone else with this information. The corruption goes higher than you might imagine." The law office of Henderson and Associates was smaller than Marcus had expected, but Sarah's research had revealed that David Henderson was one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the city. Despite their modest savings, they had agreed this was their only chance. Henderson was a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s who listened intently as Marcus recounted his story. When Marcus finished, the attorney leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. "Mr. Thompson, I'll be direct with you. The evidence against you is substantial and well-coordinated. This isn't a simple case of mistaken identity or clerical error. Someone has invested considerable time and resources in building a case against you." Sarah reached for Marcus's hand. "But he's innocent. Doesn't that count for something?" Henderson smiled sadly. "Mrs. Thompson, innocence is what we're fighting for, not what we start with in court. The prosecution will present their evidence and we need to either disprove it or provide an alternative explanation." Marcus pulled out his own file of research. "I've been thinking about this constantly. The timing of everything is too precise. Someone knew my schedule, my habits, even which locker was mine. This has to be someone with inside access to the palace. Have you made any enemies during your 12 years of service? Henderson asked. Marcus shook his head. I kept to myself mostly. Did my job, followed orders, went home to my family. I can't think of anyone who would want to hurt me this badly. Henderson made notes as they talked. What about professional jealousy? Promotions you received that others wanted? Disciplinary actions you might have reported? Marcus thought carefully. There was one incident about 6 months ago. I caught another guard, Kevin Walsh, sleeping on duty. I reported it to Sergeant Williams, and Kevin was suspended for a week. But that seems like such a small thing to build this elaborate frame-up around. Small slights can grow into big grudges, Henderson observed. What do you know about Walsh? He's been with the service for 8 years. Good family man, or so I thought. Always seemed friendly enough, but we weren't close friends. Sarah interjected, Marcus, remember what you told me about Walsh a few months ago? You said he'd bought a new car and was talking about a vacation to Europe. We wondered how he could afford it on a guard's salary. Marcus's eyes widened. You're right. Kevin did seem to have money he shouldn't have had, but I thought maybe his wife had gotten a better job or something. Henderson leaned forward with interest. This Walsh character is worth investigating. If he's living beyond his means, he might be the one actually involved in corruption. Framing you would serve two purposes: removing a threat who already reported him once, and providing a scapegoat for his own activities. The attorney assigned his private investigator, Maria Santos, to look into Kevin Walsh's finances and activities. Meanwhile, Marcus was instructed to write down everything he could remember about his interactions with Walsh and any other guards who had access to his personal information. Over the next week, Marcus's world continued to shrink. The story had leaked to the local newspaper, and reporters had been calling the house. The children's school had received concerned calls from other parents. Emma came home crying because a classmate had said her daddy was a criminal. Marcus was at his lowest point when Maria Santos called with her first report. Mr. Thompson, I think we're onto something. Kevin Walsh has made several large cash deposits over the past year, totaling nearly $50,000. His bank statements show payments for luxury items way beyond his official income. Marcus felt his first real surge of hope in weeks. Can you prove he was involved in corruption? Not yet, but I'm tracking his activities during the times mentioned. In your case, if he was the one actually letting unauthorized people into the palace, there might be evidence. Henderson joined the call from his office. Maria, can you also check if Walsh had access to Thompson's locker and schedule information? Already on it. Walsh works the rotation that gives him access to the guard scheduling system. He also has a master key that would open Thompson's locker for security inspections. The pieces were starting to fit together, but Marcus knew they needed more than financial records and access to prove Walsh had framed him. They needed evidence of the actual corruption or witnesses who could verify Walsh's guilt. That evening, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Tony Rivera, another palace guard he barely knew. Marcus, I heard about what happened to you, Tony said quietly. I probably shouldn't be calling, but I've seen some things that don't add up. Marcus's heart raced. What kind of things, Tony? I work the night shift sometimes, and I've seen Kevin Walsh having conversations with people who definitely weren't supposed to be there after hours. I thought maybe they were undercover security or something, so I never reported it. Can you describe these people? Well-dressed men in expensive suits. They would meet Walsh near the East Gate, talk for a few minutes, and then leave. I saw money change hands at least twice. Marcus could barely contain his excitement. Tony, would you be willing to tell this to my lawyer? There was a long pause. Marcus, I have a family to think about. If I get involved in this mess, I could lose my job too. I understand, Tony, but if Kevin Walsh is corrupt and he's using me as a scapegoat, then he might do the same thing to other innocent guards. None of us are safe as long as he's operating. Another pause. Let me think about it. I'll call you tomorrow. After Tony hung up, Marcus felt a mixture of hope and frustration. They were getting closer to the truth, but building a defense required people willing to take risks and speak up. Everyone was afraid of losing their jobs or becoming the next target. Sarah found Marcus pacing in their bedroom that night. Any good news? Marcus told her about Tony's call and Maria's investigation. We're making progress, but it feels like we're racing against time. The prosecutor is reviewing the case next week. Marcus, regardless of what happens, I want you to know that I believe in you completely. The children and I will stand by you no matter what. Her words gave him strength, but Marcus knew that belief wouldn't be enough if they couldn't prove his innocence. Someone had been very clever about framing him, and that same intelligence was now working to cover their tracks. As he lay awake that night, Marcus realized that Kevin Walsh wasn't just a corrupt guard. He was someone smart enough to manipulate an entire investigation. The real challenge would be proving it before Walsh could eliminate any remaining evidence or witnesses. The game was far from over, but at least now Marcus knew who his opponent was. 3 days after his suspension, Marcus sat at his kitchen table surrounded by documents, photographs, and notes. Sarah had taken the news better than he expected, but he could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes. Their 2 children, Emma and James, knew something was wrong but were too young to understand the full implications. Dad, why aren't you wearing your uniform? 8-year-old Emma asked during breakfast. Marcus exchanged a glance with Sarah before answering carefully. Daddy's taking a little break from work, sweetheart. I'll be home more often for a while. After the children left for school, Marcus returned to his makeshift investigation. He had created a timeline of the suspicious activities mentioned in the internal affairs file, cross-referencing them with his own calendar and receipts. Every piece of evidence pointed to his guilt, but he knew the truth. He had been somewhere else during each incident. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Through the peephole, Marcus saw Inspector Davies standing on his front porch with another officer he didn't recognize. Mr. Thompson, Davies said when Marcus opened the door. This is Detective Rodriguez from the Metropolitan Police. We need you to come with us for formal questioning. Marcus's heart sank. The involvement of city police meant the investigation had escalated beyond internal palace matters. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, Rodriguez replied. But we strongly recommend you bring a lawyer. Sarah appeared beside Marcus, her face pale. What's happening? Why do you need him again? Ma'am, new evidence has come to light that requires further investigation, Davies explained gently. We'll have him back home as soon as possible. The ride to the police station was silent. Marcus stared out the window, watching normal people living their normal lives. A man walking his dog, a woman pushing a stroller, teenagers laughing as they headed to school. Everyone seemed so carefree compared to his current nightmare. At the station, Marcus was led to a small interview room with concrete walls and fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. Detective Rodriguez set up a recording device while Inspector Davies opened a new, thicker file. Marcus, we've discovered something interesting, Davies began. The security cameras for the palace have been systematically corrupted for specific dates and times, the same dates when these unauthorized entries allegedly occurred. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. That proves someone was manipulating the system, right? Why would I destroy evidence of my innocence? Rodriguez leaned forward. Or it suggests you knew how to cover your tracks. You've worked palace security for 12 years. You know the camera systems better than most. The hope died quickly. Every piece of evidence that might exonerate him could also be twisted to suggest his guilt. Marcus realized he was dealing with someone far more sophisticated than a simple frame job. There's something else, Davies continued, sliding a photograph across the table. This was taken from a private security camera across the street from the palace. It shows someone in a guard uniform matching your build entering through a side gate at 2:47 a.m. on March 15th. Marcus studied the grainy image. The figure was indeed wearing a royal guard uniform and appeared to be his height and build, but the face was obscured by shadows. Inspector, I was home with my family that night. My wife can verify it. Spouses can't testify against each other in court, Rodriguez pointed out. And even if they could, people lie for their families all the time. Davies pulled out another document. We also found this in your locker. He placed a small notebook on the table, filled with what appeared to be surveillance notes and sketches of the palace layout. Marcus had never seen the notebook before. The handwriting wasn't his, but it contained detailed observations that only someone with his level of access could have made. Someone had not only framed him but had done so with incredible attention to detail. "I've never seen that notebook in my life," Marcus said firmly. "Someone planted it there." "Your locker showed no signs of tampering," Rodriguez replied. "Only you and your supervisors have the combination." The questioning continued for 4 hours. Every answer Marcus gave seemed to dig him deeper into a hole he couldn't climb out of. The evidence was circumstantial, but overwhelming in its volume and consistency. Someone had spent months, perhaps years, building a case against him. Finally, Davies closed the file. "Marcus, I want to believe you're innocent. Your service record is spotless and you've never shown any signs of corruption. But the evidence is substantial." "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly. "You're free to go, for now, but don't leave the city. We're presenting this case to the prosecutor next week." Outside the police station, Marcus called Sarah from a payphone, too emotionally drained to trust his voice on his cell phone. "It's bad, Sarah. Really bad. They have evidence I can't explain." "We'll figure this out," Sarah said, though he could hear her crying. "We'll find a lawyer and fight this." Marcus walked home through the park where he used to take his children on weekends. The playground was full of laughing kids, their parents chatting casually on benches. He wondered if his children would soon be the ones other parents whispered about, the ones whose father was arrested for corruption. That evening, as Marcus tucked Emma into bed, she asked, "Daddy, are you in trouble?" Children always sensed more than adults gave them credit for. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups face difficult situations, sweetheart. But no matter what happens, you need to know that Daddy always tries to do the right thing." "I know, Daddy. You're the goodest person in the world." Her innocent faith broke his heart. Tomorrow he would begin the fight of his life, not just for his freedom and reputation, but for the right to remain a hero in his children's eyes. As Marcus turned off Emma's light, he made a silent promise. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to destroy him, and he was going to find out who and why. The evidence against him was sophisticated and comprehensive, which meant his enemy was intelligent, patient, and had significant resources. But they had made one mistake. They had targeted a man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus Thompson adjusted his red uniform for the final time. After 12 years of faithful service as a royal guard, today felt different. Something in the air made him uneasy, though he couldn't quite place what it was. Marcus had always been proud of his position. Standing guard at one of the most prestigious locations in the country wasn't just a job. It was an honor passed down through generations in his family. His grandfather had served during the war, his father had protected the palace gates for 30 years, and now Marcus carried on the tradition. But times were changing. The new security protocols seemed excessive, and the younger guards whispered about corruption in the ranks. Marcus tried to stay focused on his duties, but the rumors were hard to ignore. Money was allegedly changing hands, certain visitors were getting special treatment, and some guards were living beyond their means. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus noticed something unusual. A black sedan with tinted windows had been parked across from the main entrance for 3 days running. The same 2 men sat inside, occasionally taking photographs and making notes. When Marcus mentioned this to his supervisor, Sergeant Williams, he was told to mind his own business and focus on his post. The day progressed normally until around noon, when Inspector Davies from Internal Affairs approached Marcus's position. Davies was known throughout the palace as a no-nonsense investigator who had cleaned house in several government departments. His presence always meant trouble for someone. "Guard Thompson," Inspector Davies called out in his crisp voice. "I need to speak with you privately." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had done nothing wrong, but internal affairs visits were never social calls. He followed Davies to a small office near the security checkpoint, his mind racing through every recent interaction and decision. "Sit down, Thompson," Davies said, pulling out a thick file. "We've been investigating some irregularities in the guard rotation schedules, and your name has come up several times." Marcus stared at the inspector, genuinely confused. "Sir, I don't understand. I've always followed protocol exactly as written." Davies opened the file and spread out several documents. "According to these records, you've been signing in for shifts. You never worked. There are also reports of unauthorized personnel entering through your checkpoint after hours." The blood drained from Marcus's face. He leaned forward to examine the papers, his hands shaking slightly. The signatures looked like his, but he knew he had never signed these particular logs. Someone had either forged his handwriting or manipulated the electronic records. "Inspector, I swear on my family's honor that I have never falsified any records or allowed unauthorized access. These signatures, they look like mine, but I didn't write them." Davies studied Marcus carefully. The guard's shock appeared genuine, but Davies had seen many guilty people play innocent over the years. "Thompson, we have video evidence of you at your post during times when these logs show you were supposedly off duty. Either you're lying to me now, or someone has been very clever about setting you up." Marcus felt the world spinning around him. His entire career, his family's reputation, everything he had worked for was crumbling because of documents he had never seen before. "Sir, please, there has to be some mistake. I would never betray my oath or dishonor my family name." The inspector closed the file and stood up. "Here's what's going to happen, Thompson. You're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Hand over your badge, keys, and weapon." With trembling hands, Marcus removed the items that had defined his identity for over a decade. Each piece felt heavier than usual as he placed them on the desk. His badge caught the light, reflecting the small dents and scratches that told the story of his years of service. "Am I under arrest?" Marcus asked quietly. "Not yet," Davies replied. "But don't leave the city. We'll need to interview you again once we've completed our investigation." As Marcus walked through the palace corridors for what might be the last time, his fellow guards avoided eye contact. Word traveled fast in their tight-knit community, and being questioned by internal affairs was like having a contagious disease. Even his closest friends stepped aside as he passed. Outside the palace gates, Marcus stood in his civilian clothes for the first time during daylight hours in 12 years. The world looked different from this perspective. The tourists taking pictures, the street vendors selling souvenirs, the normal flow of city life. It all continued while his world had stopped. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Sarah. "How was your day, honey? Dinner will be ready when you get home." Marcus stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could he tell the woman he loved that their stable, respectable life was about to be torn apart by accusations he couldn't understand? How could he explain that their children might soon face the shame of having a father branded as corrupt? He walked slowly toward the bus stop, his mind reeling with questions. Who would want to frame him? Why had someone gone to such elaborate lengths to make it appear he was involved in corruption? And most importantly, how could he prove his innocence when the evidence seemed so damning? The black sedan that had been watching the palace for 3 days pulled away from the curb as Marcus waited for his bus. Through the tinted windows, he caught a glimpse of someone photographing him. Another piece of a puzzle he didn't understand was falling into place, but Marcus was too overwhelmed to connect the dots. As the bus carried him home through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, Marcus realized that his fight was just beginning. Someone had worked very hard to destroy his reputation and career. Now he needed to figure out who and why, before it was too late to save everything he held dear. The palace grew smaller in the distance, but the weight of what had happened there would follow him home and into the uncertain days ahead.